Ancient Mesopotamia is known as the cradle of civilization. The Tigris-Euphrates River, like an arterial system coursing roughly in parallel through the heart of the Middle East and bringing life-giving water. The name Mesopotamia is Greek and it means the land between the rivers. These two rivers, whose sources lie within 80 kilometers of each other in eastern Turkey, travel some 2,000 and 2,800 kilometers respectively into the Persian Gulf. However, as long as these parallel rivers are, the history of these lands, measured in years, is even longer. 7,000 years of human irrigation farming here have created and seen rise and fall numerous fossil meanders, natural levees, abandoned canal systems, thousands of ancient settlement sites, and among the world's first recorded kingdoms and empires. The oldest of these wasn't the longest-lived of empires, nor was it the largest. It did, however, have all the hallmarks of a heroic epic tale. Its founder was said to have been the son of a simple gardener. Sargon, known to us as Sargon of Akkad or Sargon the Great, founded the Akkadian Empire. And at the height of his rule, his title could have come straight out of the pages of a high fantasy book. Sargon, king of Akkad, overseer of Inanna, king of Kish, anointed of Anu, king of the lands between the rivers, and governor of Enlil. Sargon lived roughly between 2334 and 2279 BC. Think about that. There is less time in the 2067 years between us and the death of Julius Caesar than the 2,180 years between Caesar and the death of Sargon. We have very little contemporary evidence of Sargon of Akkad. Most of what we know comes from the near-contemporary Sumerian king list. It is here that we see the earliest mention of Sargon as the son of a simple gardener, former cupbearer of Ur-Zababa of Kish, and that he then usurped the kingship from Lugal-Zagi-Si of Uruk and took it to his own city of Akkad. But let's rewind, as history on Sargon has always been a mixture of scant archaeological fragments and folklore. We know he existed, but the exact details, including his capital, elude us to this very day. The closest to a bio that we have is the legend of Sargon cuneiform tablet from the mid-600s BC. So, with that mixture, let's travel back to the late 2300s BC to the land of Sumer. The Sumerians, whose exact origins are unknown to us, spoke a non-Semitic language which would be replaced eventually by the influence of the East Semitic-speaking Akkadians. The Sumerians referred to themselves as Sagig, or black-headed ones, and their homeland as Kenjiar, or country of the noble lords. The Sumerians were going through what we now call the early dynastic period. This was a period that saw the development of writing and the formation of the first cities and states analogous to the Greek city-states. Even though these city-states were politically independent, they were relatively similar with respect to their shared material culture. These cities were generally centered around a temple dedicated to a particular patron deity, the ruler generally a Lugal or king, or an Ensi priest. Lugal itself meaning the equivalent of big or great man. To the east of their lands, located at the top portion of the Persian Gulf in present-day Iran, were the Elamites, and over the centuries their two peoples were often in conflict. We find Sargon with his mother, a priestess, in a nondescript town on the Euphrates, and with the help of familial connections, aka nepotism, he attained the desirable post of cupbearer to the ruler of the city of Kish in the north of Sumer. This was an important position, as poisonings were not uncommon, so it was a position of the utmost trust. Plus, it had the added benefit of putting this person into a new higher social circle, that of the king and his entourage. There was also the angle of using that trust to one's advantage against the king. During his time as cupbearer, the king of Umma, named Lugalzagezi, was conquering city-states in Sumer and soon stood before the city of Kish. King Ur-Zababa set his trust of Sargon into motion, and he appointed him to negotiate with Lugalzagezi. However, rather than a peace accord, the two would conspire to overthrow the city of Kish. The two were said to have co-ruled Kish, but that their relationship broke apart when Sargon supposedly had an affair with Lugalzagezi's wife, and a civil war ensued in which Sargon would emerge victorious after a decisive battle was fought. He would parade Lugalzagezi through the streets of Kish, torture him, and then execute him. With most 21st century eyes, Sargon would appear opportunistic, even bloodthirsty, but these actions were part of the power plays of the era. Sargon was now king of Kish, and he set about finishing what Lugalzagezi had started, the conquest of all of Sumer. With this foundation in place, he would go on to conquer Simurum, followed the next year by Urura. The Elamites to his east would be crushed before turning towards Mari and doing the same there. Sumer was now his. But Sargon would not stop there. He would do what no other ruler had done, continue conquering with the Assyrians, next feeling his wrath. Continuing along what we now call the Fertile Crescent, Sargon would conquer to the very shores of the Mediterranean. In time, his victories could not easily be counted, but fragments left behind come to a number in the mid-30s, with no listed records of losses during those victories. He was, by all accounts, an innovative leader as well, always adapting his tactics and making use of improvements learned along the way from foes or out of necessity. One such innovation was the use of the composite bow, which could shoot twice as far and with 3 times the force of a traditional bow. We also know that horse use for cavalry was not part of Akkadian warfare. All fighting was infantry-based. However, it's believed that he first pioneered the use of tactics like the phalanx formation, a tightly packed group of soldiers with spears and large shields, these groupings providing advantage of the looser formations used by his opponents, a strategy that Alexander would adopt 2 millennia later. Sargon would found a city named Akkad, which archaeologists have yet to locate any trace of, although there are possible candidate locations. Another city founded by Sargon is one we do know the location of: Babylon. One of the vital ingredients of empire building is administration. As many would-be great kings discovered, conquest, that's the easy part. Holding on to what you have conquered, that is much more difficult. Sargon placed his most talented and loyal men to administrate the 60-plus cities that he contained in his empire. He also placed his daughter as high priestess of one of the region's most important gods, the god of wisdom. In this way, Sargon was able to maintain cohesion throughout his new empire and prevent it from splintering apart, as was the case with many of his predecessors who had tried their hand at empire building. Modesty, though, was not one of Sargon's prime traits, as evidenced by the title he gave himself, that of Emperor of the Four Corners of the universe. It is in Sargon's empire that we also see the first mention of postal service, which helped him not only relay communications to the far reaches of his empires, but also laws and proclamations. We also see the development of large-scale civic projects like roads and massive irrigation systems on a scale required to connect and feed his growing population. Traditionally, armies would be built during times of war, usually before the start of conflict, with active mobilization taking place during it. Sargon would introduce what was then revolutionary, a 5,400-strong, full-time, standing army that he placed in his capital. What Sargon didn't have a quick solution for was the same issue that would plague most future empires: rebellion, discontent. Whereas some like Rome would partially appease the population through doles of food and violent games, Sargon relied on the readily available technique of armed and brutal suppression through violence to quell any and all uprisings. Sargon would rule for 56 years, although some interpret this number as a 30-some-odd year reign, dying of natural causes in roughly the year 2279 BC. His empire would pass on to his son Rimush, who would rule for 9 years before passing it on to his brother. In all, the Akkadian Empire would last for another century. His name, however, would live on through the period of the Assyrians, the Babylonians, the Persians, the Greeks, to our present day. Sargon the Great, the first recorded builder of an empire.